Okay, so in the first experiment, I showed, or it suggests that something's going on. They're learning something. Some information is being stored, whether that's the layout of the map itself or the sequence of responses that are required to complete the maze, right? So it's not clear what's being learned. So, for example, if you're a rat, you might go, hey, if I walk this much and then I turn right and then I walk this much and I turn left, those would be the sequence of responses that might be stored. And the idea is that they're either learning the correct place of the reward, irrespective of what responses are required, or they are learning the correct responses. And so in the next experiment will test the place learning account and the response learning account. So I'm going to go a little slow because it's kind of a tricky experiment. Okay, so what Tolman did was he has what's called a radial maze, I believe, and there's like four arms of the maze: north, south, east, and west. On some trials, group one is what we call the place learning group, we'll call it. And here you can see that on half the trials, the rats would be placed in the south arm of the maze, and the reinforcement or food would be on the east side of the maze. Whereas on other trials, the reinforcement would be on the east arm. However, rats would start from the north arm of the maze. So the important thing here is that if a rat starts from the south arm, they have to figure out that they're in the south arm, but then they have to turn right to get to the reinforcement. Whereas on trials in which rats start from the north, they have to realize that they're starting from the north, and as a result, they have to turn left to go to the reinforcement. Sorry, they have to turn, yeah, left, right. Okay, so if you start from the north or from the south, if you start from the south, the reward is east. And if you start from the north, the reward is east, right? It's in the same place. But because they're starting at different arms of the maze, they have to do different responses. If they start from the south, they have to go right. And if they start from the north, they have to go left. So if they do the same response, if they go left or right on every single trial, they're only going to get the reward on like half of the trials. And so, yeah, to get the reward, the rats must learn the place in the environment. And that's why it's called learning, uh, place learning, right? Sorry. And so if they merely repeated the same response, they would only succeed in reaching the food or reward on half of the trials. Now we can contrast this with what's called response learning. Group two is the response learning group. So here the rats on half the trials, they start from the south, and on the other half of the trials, they start from the north. And so on half the trials, when they start from the south, the reinforcement is in the east arm of the maze, which means they have to go right. And then on other trials, the rats start from the north, but they now the reinforcement is in the west arm of the maze. And so in both cases, even though they're starting from different places, whether they're starting from the north or south, they have to go right on each trial. And so doing the same response on every single trial, regardless, would lead to 100% accuracy. That is, if in fact they're learning the response and not the place. So yeah, to get to the reward, the rats must learn the response and not necessarily the place. So if rats are merely learning the same response, the correct response, then in the place learning condition, they would only succeed in reaching the reward on half of the trials. But if they're learning the place, then they're going to do really well in that group. Whereas for this group, the second group, repeating the same turning response would invariably lead to the reward, irrespective of the starting point, if they're learning the response instead of the place. So here's the data, right? And this shows the total number of errors for rats in the response learning condition as well as rats in the place learning condition as a function of trials. And you see that the response learning condition is not doing very well. So the group that the rats of the with the rats who were in the group that they had to do the same response over and over and over again, they didn't actually do that well. Whereas the group whereas the rats in the place learning condition rapidly learn the location, the place of the food. So this strongly suggests that rats stored representations of their environment. And in other words, they have stored cognitive maps of their environment. And so going back to behaviorism, it denies the existence of representations and states that learning only occurs after being reinforced. I should point out that it's more accurate to say that behaviorists, they didn't necessarily deny the existence of representations, but they sort of ignored them. And so that's just an aside, right? And so as the first experiment I talked about showed that learning is possible without being reinforced. Now, what they're learning, whether it's place learning of the reinforcement or the responses required, is not answered by experiment one. However, in the second experiment, experiment two, it showed that rats learned and stored information about their environment, similar to a map. And so this eventually leads to what I would call the fall of behaviorism. I don't want to say that it led to it's not quite the fall of behaviorism because behaviorism is still a thing that people do. There are people who are behaviorists who study behaviorism, but it's lost its dominance in psychology. And so this is partly because behaviorism resisted addressing questions or theories that invoked mental representations. And this was okay for a while, but these stimulus response explanations could not easily explain Tolman's results. So if learning and behavior is due to a stimulus being associated to a response, that leaves no room for a mental representation that could explain the responses themselves. Uh, and so it showed that you need an internal map, like a cognitive map, to fully explain the pattern of results. Okay, and so in the next video, we'll talk about Carl Lashley's article about the serial order problem in behaviorism.